So as I was saying, I'm calling this the Democracy Forum, and it happens every Wednesday from 12 to 1 at the Brown Bag Lunch here at the Strolling of the Heifers. And it's just to give people an opportunity to make some public statements on Main Street in Brattleboro about what's going on with democracy. That's the purpose of it. Because I believe that we should be talking about what's happening to us in public with all the people that we can talk to. So that's the intent of this Democracy Forum. Thank you all for coming.
And it's every Wednesday.
It is. We might not be here next Wednesday, but it is supposed to be every Wednesday. Yeah. And I should introduce Dan Dewalt, our speaker, who is going to talk about restorative justice in the age of Trump. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Louis. Thank you guys for coming. Listening. So, when Woody told me about this series, the first thing that came to mind is restorative justice, because I'm all active in starting a restorative justice organization, and I've been doing that work. And I will tell you about that work in a minute. But the context was, it's a new, America finds itself in a new situation. The Trump administration and the Republicans running Congress. And so a lot of people are wringing their hands and they're trying to figure out what to do. And a lot of what people are doing is trying to figure out different ways to resist. You know, whether it's protesting or not cooperating with requests on the behalf of like our Secretary of State or Attorney General on our behalf, saying no, we're not going to comply with your election commission laws. And having been a person who has protested a lot over a long period of time, I think it's great. I think it's totally appropriate and the right thing to do. But I think perhaps more importantly, I think we need to build strong community institutions that can withstand things like Donald Trump and the Republicans. And I think the reaction, like after this election, we had a little community meeting in South Newfane. I live in the village of South Newfane, which is, I don't know, 60 people or something, village, if that. And we had a meeting, and 40 people came to this meeting in the schoolhouse, and everybody's like, what are we going to do? What can we do? And we were talking about different things, and we formed different study groups. And, you know, in 8 years of Bush and Cheney, with torture, illegal war, Guantanamo, the bank bailout, we didn't get that kind of response. So, in a funny way, I'm grateful to the big evil man in orange for instigating civil discussion and making people think that they actually have to do something as an American citizen rather than simply be an observer. Because what we have seen as being an observer is not enough. We can observe, we can criticize, but some really bad things can happen if we don't actually take action. So my approach to this is, if we build within our communities, welcome, you haven't missed much, but if we build within our communities groups and institutions that are doing very specific concrete things, not only will we benefit from the value of those specific concrete things that those groups are doing, but we will also have at our disposal an informed and organized populace. So, you know, you can think of it in terms of like a militia, except without the guns. We have a population that not only understands the Constitution, understands laws, but also knows how to work with each other, knows how to organize, knows how to get things done at various times. Then if we face some really civil liberty crises, which is a possibility under this administration, we won't be starting at 0. We'll be starting, you know, at 30. We'll have organizations in place. We'll know how to work with each other. We'll know who we can depend on. We'll know what other organizations need to do. So that's where my focus is. In my response to the Trump administration is I'm trying to build something with the help of a bunch of other people. And that thing is a restorative community justice of Southern Vermont. And so before I tell you about the organization, I'll say about restorative justice. Have anyone, I'm going to tell you about it anyway, but are any of you at all familiar with restorative justice? A couple folks. So, our criminal justice system asks, who did it? And what's the punishment? And then, oh, you did this? There's punishment, you go to jail, we kill you, pay a fine. And the person who was harmed, oftentimes, is just left out of the shuffle. You know, sometimes they're even abused by the court system. There's a plea deal, they don't even have a say in it. And not very much is resolved. You know, one person knows that the person that did them damage perhaps is in jail. The person that is in jail is just sitting in jail, not doing anything except being better prepared to be a better criminal when he comes out of jail. So this system doesn't work. And amazingly, even the conservatives in this country, thanks to its high expenses, have figured out that it doesn't work. And so there's actually movement in this country to think about our criminal justice system in a slightly different fashion. And the state of Vermont is actually one of the forerunners of this. And we're promoting restorative justice in the state. And what restorative justice asks is, it doesn't ask who did it. It asks who was harmed, who did the harming. But then, each one of those people involved, including the person who did the harm, the question you ask them is, you know, what happened? And they tell you what happened. And you say, what were you thinking at the time? And they tell you what they were thinking. You say, well, what were you feeling at the time? They tell you that. You say, who was affected by your actions? Think about that, and they tell you that. And then you ask them, what was the hardest thing for you? And then the person, the bad guy, or the bad girl, who did the bad thing, you ask them the same question. What were you thinking? What were you feeling? Who do you think was affected by your actions? And when you're the perpetrator, especially, and you have someone in some sort of process come up to you and not say, okay, I need the facts, I need to know what you did, where you were before and where you were after. Instead they say, what was this experience like for you? What happened for you? Tell me from your point of view what happened. And then tell me how it affected you. What did it do? Because there's one thing that everybody can speak accurately about if they choose to, and that's themselves. And there's one thing that no one of us can speak accurately about, and that's in the other person. We don't know anything about another person's motivations. We might have great theories, but we don't really know. We don't know what this person has experienced in this particular incident, unless we ask them. When you ask folks and you give them a chance to think through that, like when you say to someone, who do you think was affected by their actions? And they say, well, no. You say, well, you know, who else? This kid, like, you know, oh yeah, I guess my mom and dad, you know, that's a role. And then they keep thinking about, yeah, I guess you know, you're asking me these questions. And like, and they realize, there's this, it's like you drop the pebble in, and just ever widening ripple of circles of, oh, I did this one thing. All these people were affected. All of these people were affected. I wasn't even thinking about them, because I was thinking about just the fact that X, Y, Z. You know, I was backed into a corner. I was starving. I was high. My parents just threw me out of the house. Whatever. None of these things are justification for, you know, being violent or stealing or whatever. But they are reasons. And if you acknowledge that a person is a person, not a culprit, and you ask them to explain themselves as a person, that gives them ownership of what they did, and it gives them a place in your world. Because right now, if you're a culprit, your place in my world is in jail, or you know, on probation, or with your ankle bracelet, or whatever. That's your place. But in restorative justice, your place is in society. The goal of restorative justice is, how do we get the two of you, the 10 of you, whatever it might be, how do we get you to be able to be together? How do we get you to be able to coexist? That's the goal. What do you need, the person who has been harmed? What do you need to repair that harm and feel safe? And to the person that did the harming, what do you need? So people say, well, like, what are you doing asking the culprit what he needs? What he needs is a good, you know, crack across the head in jail. We don't know what they need. You might find out that that person needs I need a ride to work. Because if I had a ride to work, I wouldn't have had to go in there and steal $27 from that lady's purse. Whatever it might be. We have no idea what someone needs unless we ask them. When you have a restorative circle, you also give the folks who have been harmed and the folks who did the harming a chance to bring supporters with them. Say, is there anyone you'd like to bring to this thing? It might be a friend, a mother, a coworker, whatever. And those people are also asked a series of questions. You know, when did you hear about this? What's your understanding about what happened? What do you think and what do you feel about what happened? What do you think of the main issues? Because these people have a slightly different perspective. And a lot of times, the person who is the supporter of the culprit or the harmed or whatever, they can often be the harshest critic or the most truth-telling critic of the person who acted poorly. You say, well, you know, how come you're not apologizing? Or, you know, that seems like a really lame excuse. I mean, they will call their friends on things, and oftentimes the supporters are really valuable because they're bearers of the harsh truth to their friends, because that's true friendship is about that, and that often happens in these situations. So after everyone has had a chance to reflect on the incident and their own understanding of it, their own perspective of why it happened and what was happening, a lot of times just in that itself, like, you know, the person that did it says, well, I was feeling like they were threatening me, and I felt I had no choice except to do this. But then they've heard the other person saying, you know, I was stretching. I don't know what they said, but like, oh, so my perception of what you were thinking was wrong, so my action really wasn't justified because I was misreading you. There's no crime in misreading a person. I think there's a crime in never finding out that we misread a person. You know, it's like, you can make mistakes. You can misread someone. You can do the wrong thing. You can react badly. But if you take the time to find out where you were, what you were thinking, what you were feeling, and what that other person was thinking, then you have a real chance of not having it happen again, which is really the goal. The goal, again, is not throwing someone in jail. The goal is not paying a fine. You know, it could be that someone needs, you know, what do you need to be repaired? Well, I need replacement costs for my windows. You know, certainly money can enter into a restorative justice agreement. But this isn't about just like levying fines. This is about restoring harm, repairing harm, and restoring confidence and restoring trust. And what I've described to you is a rather formal process of a restorative circle. You can take that circle and even expand it in a larger sense. Let's say you have someone who's back from jail and they're on probation, and part of their probation is they have to stay alcohol-free. And that person might be having a hard time doing that. So you could just throw them back in the slammer, or you could convene a family circle, in which case someone, a restorative practitioner, would go to that person and say, okay, what's your situation? Say, okay, I'm falling off the wagon, whatever it might be, and I need some support. And then you go, you say, well, who has any connection to your life? So, well, I'm one of my folks right now, so my folks, my buddy, Bill, my girlfriend. And then you go and you interview every one of those people. And you say, so-and-so's in crisis. And he's trying to keep him, going back to jail. Is there any, can you imagine helping in any way figure out a way for him to get out of crisis? And they say yes or no. And you say, and who else is in this web of people? Who has any connection to this guy at all? And you actually interview every one of those people. You find everybody that they told you has any connection to this person. And you interview all of them. And you ask them all these same questions about the situation. What do you think is the main issues? What's the hardest thing? And then, after doing that, there's a couple different ways of doing it. The best way to do it is you, among those interviews, you find the most likely person who would be able to facilitate a meeting. You get all those people together, and then you leave the room. And they figure out, okay, what are we going to do to help Jimbo? What are we going to do to help Kathy? And they hash it out, and you're nearby, so if they're having trouble, you might be able to come in and help facilitate a little bit. But restorative practitioners are not arbitrators. They don't come up with solutions. They don't make a judgment. They simply work really hard to get people to be able to talk. And the secret to that is listening. We're creating a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're raising a bunch of money. We're doing all this ridiculous amount of formal training for people, simply to teach us how to listen, which is really sad, but true and necessary. So that's what we have to do. That big family circle, that has potential, and these are practices which are not new, actually. They've been happening in New Zealand, they're happening in Holland, lots of different countries to greater and lesser degrees than here, and they're starting to catch on here. Restorative practices also go in the other less formal direction, right down to just conversations in the hallway, on the street, how you interact with people. And it really comes down to interacting with people in a way that gives them a chance to actually say something that's heard. How many of us have been in a conversation with someone who wasn't hearing what you were saying? And I can't imagine that none of us have not experienced that. Often, multiple times. We've spoken to politicians, so we know what's happening, at least one. When you think in terms of really what it means to listen to people and what you can do and what you can't do in terms of your reactions or analysis of your power and your strength, you open up a whole field of possibilities of people being able to figure out how to make their own situations better with the resources they have, which is their connections, their families, their friends, things they have. Because we can come up with all kinds of great ideas about how to make things better, and they usually involve a lot of resources, which people don't have. So restorative practices are making use of resources people do have. And they can be very meager resources indeed, but that doesn't mean that they can't be really valuable. So right now, the state of Vermont, if you are maybe a first-time offender and they decide to put you in a diversion, they might have you go to a restorative panel. And a restorative panel, same type of thing, a little bit different than what I described. But they talk to the person, and the panel will sometimes proscribe to them something they think they should do. We think we should do this, a letter of apology, this, or that. Sometimes a restorative panel will have the participants themselves figure out what they need to do. It seems to vary from one organization to another here. But those are sponsored by Department of Corrections and I believe the Attorney General's office. And so they pay for the staff people, and they also provide the caseload. So you get prisoners re-entering society, often will go through restorative justice organizations in towns. You'll get diversions from court, and that's all court-related. I've been doing this work for, I guess, 6 years or so in a high school, up at Leland Gray High School in Townsend. And what I found is that it's amazing. It's an eye-opener, especially kids who have been in trouble over and over and over again. To have someone ask them what's going on, what's the hardest thing for you? They've never been asked that before. And it's made a marked difference in the atmosphere and the success of the discipline situation in Leland Gray. Our numbers of suspensions have dropped. Nationwide, where they've had more time, some of these practices have been in place, it's across the board. School suspensions dropped by large numbers. And it's also an absolute statistical fact, and I believe it's correlated, not just, whatever that word is, might be coincidental, that if you are suspended from school, your risk of going to jail, like it's a large percent, I don't know the numbers, and if you're suspended from school like 2 or 3 times, you're almost guaranteed. That's your go to jail card. Get out of school and you got your go to jail card because the school hasn't figured out how to keep you from getting suspended 3 times. In Leland and Gray, when I've been doing this work, I also realized in talking to these kids, their assets, their resources are non-existent in some cases. They're not assets, they're liabilities. Their living situation is a liability. Their relatives might be a liability. Their friends might be liabilities. There's not an asset in sight. And so to have a little world of restorative justice in a high school is great. But when that's surrounded by this bigger world of nothing restorative about it, life and justice, it's not so great because it's not enough. You can't take 5-6 hours a day of one kind of an atmosphere and expect the change. So what we realize is we need to inculcate values and processes of restorative practices up and down. I live up the West River, so we started in the West River Valley. But restorative community justice of Southern Vermont. We're starting in Southern Vermont. We want restorative practices, restorative thinking, and facility with restorative procedures to be just as common as it is for someone to know about how to plant a tomato seed, how to mow their lawn, how to live, how to put on a swimsuit and jump in the water in Vermont. This should just be part of our culture. And it's far away from being a part of our culture right now, almost as it possibly can be. So our organization is dedicated to creating a core of trained volunteers who will know and understand the variety of restorative practices to be able to do. And then our organization will be looking for conflicts to resolve, working with social workers, working with the sheriff's department, working with principals, working with just public relations just out in the communities. If you are having domestic troubles, if you're having disputes with your neighbors, if you're having conflict, give restorative justice a try. And we will have, in another couple of years, 50, 60 people who can do this work. And they will be out there and they'll be free. And when other people experience it, not only will they get to experience that circle and see how it can work, they will also, because this organization will be fully functional, they will have the opportunity to become trained themselves so they know how to do it. So, if we have 50 people trained, and only one of them goes on to facilitate circles, but the other 49 people are using restorative thinking in their inner relationships with their neighbors and their friends, that's a big plus right there. So we don't even, it's not like we have to have 1 million volunteers out there working. We do want to have a bunch of volunteers working. But we want this way of thinking to just be our way of thinking. Coming back to Trump, and this is not, a lot of people, when I tell them about restorative justice, they say, well, yeah, that's good. Yeah, those poor people, they just don't have assets. Yeah, that's true, poor people have less assets. Restorative practices are not limited to being something for poor people. I know a lot of rich people who could use restorative thinking. I know plenty of middle-class people who could use restorative thinking. Restorative thinking is not, it cuts across all class boundaries. Just because you were well off and you've got lots of assets doesn't mean that you have any sensibility that makes you a better person to deal with conflict. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be mean and violent to your family. Abuse, crime, nastiness knows no economic boundaries. The people who got caught, there's economic boundaries there. Who gets caught and who gets to jail? Poor people. The rich people who are criminals, much less likely to go to jail. They got good lawyers, they got the status of the community, which is a very big prejudice that people don't even realize they have when they're, dealing with someone. It's like, well, he's a well-respected person in the community. Therefore, without even thinking about it, I am going to be biased in his favor. You're a poor person with dirty clothes. Without even thinking about it, I'm biased against you. That's reality. We can't pretend that doesn't happen. And then, it could happen with me. I'm not really sure if it's like, I would think, how could it happen with me? I'm Mr. Restorative Justice. I don't even know that I can say that. I would have to have 1,000 of those experiences to judge whether I'm really not making those biases, those implicit biases come out or not. And when we think about this new America, and especially around here, people are saying, well, I can't stand if I can't even talk to a Trump voter. I can't even, these people, how can you possibly, here's the typical question for a Trump voter is, how could you do that? Okay, so that's not exactly a question that engenders like a thoughtful conversation. Well, I didn't say how the F did you, it's like, just so, no. Like, the question is, what do you think is going to happen? What was your, why, why? Just a simple, so why did you vote? Why did you do this? Because what I think we don't, and this is, again, I think we don't we have this concept, especially I think around here, most people are fairly comfortable, most people are sort of liberal or progressive. So we have this notion about how our country works. And we think it kind of works. But many things about our country do not work. And especially if you're a person of color, if you're a person of poverty, it doesn't work at all. It does not work. But we don't seem to fully understand that. So to our mind, someone saying, okay, this system doesn't work. Hillary Clinton, the Democrats, they're all part of the same system. This guy, I need something different. Maybe it'll work. I might think that's a bad decision. You might think that's a bad decision. But to make some kind of a judgment on that person and then write that person off is insanity. Because there were very valid reasons for people not to say this system is broken. This system has been broken for the last few presidents. You know, we have presidents who put people in Guantanamo, start illegal wars, spy on Americans, have a Tuesday morning murder club, who were killed by drone today. You know, it's like Clinton, Bush, Obama. They all had their share of unconstitutional actions, illegal actions, and under each one of their administrations, we had people of color being murdered by the police forces. We had poor people being pushed further into poverty. The class divide in this country getting bigger and bigger. So this country is not working. And the Trump election is, granted, probably a bad result, but it is a result of people realizing that this country was not working. And being irritated that the Democratic Party, rather than embrace something which actually might have changed the tide, which is the Bernie Sanders candidacy, which had, you know, the Sanders message was the same as the Trump message in terms of dissatisfaction. And the Democrats couldn't seem to understand how dissatisfied we are with our country. So I'm actually, I think this is really good for us in some ways. It's really bad for immigrants right now. It's really bad for the environment. There's going to be a bunch of damage. There's going to be a bunch of people harmed. There are people harmed by every administration. If we can make the people who are harmed by this administration, at least, if we can at least respond in an appropriate fashion and do some positive work as a result of that, at least their suffering won't have been in vain. The suffering and the death and destruction that have been happening for the last 50 years by virtue of American policies towards our own people, so far have been in vain, because we haven't really changed anything. So restorative thinking goes way beyond just like helping that unfortunate person that stole his neighbor's tractor. It goes to, how do I have a conversation with someone who I think is out of their mind? How do I have a conversation with someone who I just can't even imagine how they voted the way they voted? And you do that by listening. And you really find out. And you might find out, okay, I voted for Trump because I'm a racist, and I'm a misogynist, and you know, I'm greedy. Okay, well, we don't have a lot in common. But there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, I voted for him because the system wasn't working, I voted for him because I thought maybe you'd get more jobs. You know, then you have somewhere to have a conversation. Then you have a conversation. And it's because if you're just like this, you don't get anywhere. You know, look at Congress. Congress can't even do it. You know, you listen to the radio. Most of the radio guys are like, it's not about any kind of dialogue. It's just about me, it's about my ideas, and you know, Rush Limbaugh, he won't even take a call that disagrees with him. And other guys that take calls that disagree with him just do it so they can like camera on a person. You know, right and left. There's very little honest avenues for people to express different things. So anyway, that's our organization. So that's what restorative justice is about. This is how I think that it can be really a positive force for where we're heading. Our organization in general, we have a board of directors. Kate Costa is one of the board members, and we have a challenge grant of $10,000. We've raised like if we can raise another $14,000 by the end of this year, we will be able to hire a half-time person, and that person will be organizing trainings and looking for grant. And then in the second year, the plan is to have 2 people at about 60% wages, because it's more than one person's job, to organize conflict resolution, trainings, and raising money and furthering the organization. So in a couple of years, we want to have basically a major core of people who know what they're doing and can be on short notice helping folks resolve conflicts, and at the same time be ever increasing the number of people who are familiar with these practices. Yes.
Congratulations on what you're doing. I'd like to suggest another dimension which carries what you're doing further, but is very difficult to do. Nearly 70 years ago, as a social worker in Harlem, and we even started a school for dropouts at juvenile delinquents released from detention or prisons to come to our school for dropouts, a second chance institution. But we'd also read A.S. Neal, and one concept, it has many, what really struck us was Neal said that when a juvenile steals, they're not really stealing, they're stealing love. What they need is love. And his conclusion then, what you should do, what took restorative justice even further, he didn't use those words, but he used what he said was, you must reward the thief. The stealing love, he needs to be rewarded, not punished. So the challenge then in our work was to find ways to deal with juvenile delinquents who is stealing love, to reward them so that they would move. Largely we were successful, but it was a real challenge. And I think in your work, that concept would also help.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think being listened to is one of the things we give people. You know, you've done something and you're in trouble, and we're asking you to be able to, we're giving you an opportunity to talk about yourself, talk about what you need, what you are hurting. And I think that's, well taken. Yes, Curtis.
You spoke about Vermont being a leader in restorative practices. I was connected to the question, restorative practices for whom? Because I see very few persons of color who are accorded diversion that then leads to the possibility of restorative practices. So how do you influence the judicial system so that more young offenders of color are having the option of restorative practices as opposed to jail?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. What I'm hoping is when we, like right now, there's a lot of demand for our services, more than we have. I'm the only person that's sort of done it enough to be fully functional. And I have people who are trained, we've got several hours of training, and some of whom have co-facilitated, but you know, we don't have that core. The core is one. When we have 20 people fully vested in it, then we can make that pitch even more to the, you know, to the Attorney General's office, to the Department of Corrections, and say, look, we know what you got. You've got the Brattleboro Justice Center, you got Bellasville Justice Center, but just you need to know that there's us also, and we have this, and you can send your people our way also. And it could be that once we establish ourselves, we might connect with them and have them provide another staff person and have that be a whole part of the thing. I'm thinking that it might be, well, actually, I have no idea why, and I can only have an unfortunate guess on, you know, people of color being disproportionately not part of this process. I would think part of it would be just the numbers of possibilities of restorative circles, period. That still wouldn't address why the disparity in percentages. And other than advocating, I have no answer for that at the moment.
Thank you, Dan. My name is Ann Brenton. I live in the neighborhood. So glad to be here. Thank you for your service. I was just asking, when I was more actively involved with the church down there, the congregation, probably about 20 years ago, there was a man who used to be, he was a minister, and he had a background that was completely humanitarian background. He traveled countries that really are desperate. And he and some people at that church started it and talked about it. And I was just wondering if there are any places that are functional, like especially places like that, in the neighborhood.
What was it that he
This was a
started?
congregational church.
But he started doing what?
This is restorative justice.
Oh,
This was a
restorative
very
justice.
new
Oh.
concept for a lot of us. Do you know of any churches? Are they doing this in the neighborhood? Is there any organization doing this?
Well, there's Brattleboro Restorative Justice Center, which is connected with the Department of Corrections. Youth Services does some restorative panels, although their panelists actually don't have much training in restorative practices.
I see.
Which is one of the things our organization will be able to do as soon as we're up and running more, is help organizations like that with getting themselves fully trained.
But I do want to have, whenever it gets something to do with anything like this, somebody else's life, the person who's providing the services needs to be a peer.
To be
In
here.
every sense of the word, has got to be a peer. I was in that business in inner cities. I was not a peer. I did my best. It wasn't right. It wasn't right. And, that was my experience. So,
Thank
you.
I think that that's one of the beauties of this practice is our role is simply to assemble peers. Our role is to assemble people who are associated with this incident and these people. And then our role is to get them to think and express themselves. So we're not, it's not me, I'm not telling you anything. I'm just asking questions and giving you a chance to have support from your peers.
It's got to be the language of love.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. Any other questions or comments?
I think VUHS also has restorative practices there as well. Do you know if Twin Valley is doing it?
I don't know if Twin Valley is. I know at VUHS, some people think it's more robust, and some people think it's not so robust. And what I found here at our school is people have the sense that just because you're not like punishing someone, you're not holding people accountable. And so they're, it's all kumbaya. Like, first of all, for the record, kumbaya is a perfectly nice song. I think people should stop trashing kumbaya. But this has nothing to do with that. This is not, you poor, It's simply, how do we get you and you who are in conflict to be able to coexist peacefully? That's end of story. That's all. We don't need you to pay a price. We need you to be able to coexist. We don't need you, and like I said before, sometimes there's restitution involved. But the point of the thing is restoring relationships in a state of harmony. And that is the end product. Yes, you had a raise your hand.
It's in society's interest to change people, to help people become more social, less antisocial, which I assume is what restorative justice is all about. But is it, in spite of being in society's interest to do so, can a society require that of people who have shown a need for restorative justice?
That's a really good question. My philosophy on this, and I think it might be fairly widespread, this is a voluntary process. And I tell people, every step right up until you're in that circle with those people, you're here because you want to be. And if you can't, if you're too uncomfortable, you can leave at any point. When the Department of Corrections says you're going to go to a restorative circle or a restorative panel, and they're going to figure out what you're going to do, that's a little different. And that when we have been used, like at the high school, there have been times where somebody said, okay, you're going to get suspended unless you do this. And so then they send them to me, and I said, well, you don't need to do this unless
Let
you
me
want to.
rephrase that. You didn't quite, if you're in prison at some point when you reach a certain point in your term, there's a board
Right.
which looks at you and makes a determination whether you can be released now or wait for the next session, next board session. So they are judging your behavior, what they know of it. All right, so there's precedent for that. Now, I do know that what you're speaking of, this program, is a voluntary program. My question is there something undemocratic or unethical about making it not quite involuntary, but perhaps increasing the penalties if you don't go through that, so almost pushing?
Yeah, to my own personal mind, yeah, I would say that would be unethical. I mean, if you want to promote something, I think you should promote something by making a good case for it. I think you should promote something by making a really compelling case for it. Rather than saying, I'm going to promote this because if you don't do it, you're going to get punished. Like, that to me is antithetical for what this whole practice is about. And at the school, there have been times where we've kind of gone like this with the administration because like, oh, they have to do this. I said, no, they don't. Or you do it because I'm not going to do it because I'm not going to force anybody to do anything. This is not, you know, if you want to make this part of your punishment system, you need to do it with someone else.
So are things like, I mean, I think if you are caught drunk driving, you're required to go through a course.
Right.
Now that's a learning course. That's not, I don't think that's considered punishment. That's considered re-education. Well, but you're saying that you can't look at restorative justice as a re-education process.
Well, in terms, if it's a re-education as in re-education camp or like forcing someone to learn something new, no, it certainly is a re-education process because it's a different way of thinking. So by exposing
Educational process for the community more than what.
yeah, we're not saying you have to take this course and pass this test at the end. We're saying, check this out. This is a better way of doing things. But if you're not interested in doing it or participating in it, then it makes no sense to do it. Like, people have to want to restore a relationship. If someone's like, screw that person, I don't want to, I don't want to have anything to do with that person, they're not a candidate to do a restorative circle with. It's just like, people need to want to end the conflict. That's really the one criteria. Is if do you want to end this conflict? Do you want to be able to get along? Then you're a good candidate for restorative practices.
It's sort of like drunk driving, they tell the offender to go to AA. Well, how does that work? You know, any kind of a program that's kind of good for you, you have to want it. You know, it's a program of attraction, not promotion. So it doesn't, people will do it if they want it.
Right.
But that's our job, to make it attractive.
But isn't it already, when there's a candidate for such a program, aren't they already being somewhat channeled or coerced because it's known to them that if they voluntarily go through this restorative justice program, they may get a lesser punishment. Isn't that what you call diversion? So it's already set up so that the perp is aware that there's an advantage to him or her to go through that. And I'm saying, is there something now, do we cross some kind of a line if we increase the motivation? We say, all right, you can get 10 years for this, but if you go through restorative justice and convince or you satisfy whatever needs to be satisfied, you may only get 4 years.
Well, I would say, first of all, what you're talking about is the restorative justice as practiced by the restorative justice centers across the state. What we're doing is specifically different from that in that we are reaching out to the community level where no one is dragging anybody by the nose to us and saying you have to do this. That's the Department of Corrections thing, and I think that's a valid question. To answer just my opinion on what your question was, it seems to me that even if someone had the impetus, like, okay, I have the incentive of a reduced sentence, with the operative word there is you said if you can convince it, if you can do that restorative practice where everyone is convinced. So the person that was harmed is not going to be easily convinced just because you want a lighter prison sentence. So I think there's value, even in a case of it where you can sort of see as possible coercion, it certainly has a potential for value there. What we're trying to do is just get out of, as valuable as I think restorative practices are in lessening the number of people in prison and lessening the number of people being charged, what we're really trying to do is bring it down at another level entirely. Before you're involved in the criminal justice system, in the community, that the community knows they have a resource that is free and effective in helping them resolve conflicts. So everything you said, I think, has validity to it. None of that would apply to what we're doing because we're not part of that industrial restorative complex. Yes?
Is there a difference between restorative justice and restitution?
Yes. Restorative justice might involve restitution. It might not. Sometimes people, it's funny, people who have been pretty seriously harmed at times, what do they want? They want a sincere apology. You know, a sincere apology. They want to feel, or they might have an understanding. They might come to an understanding of why something happened, and as much as they didn't like that it happened, that's all they need. So restitution is something that which in restitution can also be part of an agreement. It's like, well, what do I need? Well, I need restitution for what was lost or damaged. And the other person goes, well, I can do that, and figure out how it's going to happen. But so it's not like it's completely divorced from anything restorative, but it's just its own separate thing. It wouldn't necessarily be part of a restorative agreement. Have you sufficiently flogged this horse?
Yes. Thank you.
So, if any of you have any interest in sort of learning more about an organization or participating or finding someone who wants to give us some money to help hire that person, all right.
Okay.
Awesome. My name is Dan Dewalt. I'm in the phone book. Restorative Community Justice of Southern Vermont has a website which you can contact us from. And yes, hopefully within a few months we might have someone doing a practicum, so we'll have a person working. But hopefully soon we'll have a person working, and we'll be able to. Right now I'm the public face and the works and everything, which is not enough. Our presence will be becoming more pronounced in the hopefully near future. But thanks for coming, and thanks for thinking about it, and thanks for the good questions. And
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks very much, Dan.
you're welcome.
Appreciate it. Very good to hear.
Yeah, the reason I'm doing this is because it works. I'm really impressed. Like, yeah, this stuff works. It gives me something I can work on. And it's not just like beating my head against another wall.
Positive.